Hello and welcome to the Sisters for Fitness Wellness Show. I'm Stephanie Gaines-Bryant. Our guest today is my soror, Krysta Jones. She's founder of Vote Lead Impact.
Yes.
VLI. And we're going to be talking about a couple of things today because you're active in a couple of different areas. Black women in World War II, Hands Off Our History, Women's Vote Centennial, and the National Women's History Alliance.
Yes.
And I brought you in specifically to talk about the fact that a lot of African American history, they're either trying to whitewash it or erase it completely. And you specialize in that. And I really wanted to have a discussion about in what ways that's taking place. So let's start off. Welcome.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. You know, I'm really glad that you're talking about this in this moment of history. As we were saying earlier, there are elections. A lot of people don't realize that in Virginia and New Jersey, there are statewide gubernatorial elections.
Yes.
And this topic, in ways, whether we realize it or not, may become a part of what people are thinking about when they go to the polls, because there have been efforts across the nation, like as you say, whitewash history. I was actually involved in the Hands Off Your History movement. There has been a group called Save Our Smithsonian, African American or larger, just community leaders, faith leaders, civic education leaders, civic empowerment leaders, who've been focusing on what's been happening at the National Museum of African American History and Culture to potentially remove certain exhibits, and then also the banning of books, and just the efforts across the nation to change what we have learned about history. I participated in a rally in DC back in May, and we walked from the Wilson Building in DC to the Smithsonian. But my remarks at that time really focused on the fact that how this really hurts me is we're losing our democracy. There have a lot of different people who speak, you know, we have a lot of different ideas on whether our democracy is the best that it could be. But, you know, I was actually in the Peace Corps. I left to join the Peace Corps in Paraguay, South America, 25 years ago, specifically to help convert their dictatorship to a democracy. And what I said in my remarks at the Wilson Building back in May was that today we are now fighting to save our own democracy. And things like banning books, whitewashing history is a part of that struggle that we're facing. And for me, the fight really is not just about preserving the past, but also thinking about what we're doing today, how that will soon become history, and how that will be changed. So this whole movement effort is just so important that we all work towards this, because it's something that's happening today. It's current. I don't want people to think of it as something only in the past that we're trying to change.
Or we think because things feel normal.
Yes.
You're going to the movies on the weekends, you go to work every day, you may go to the gym, and you go grocery shopping. Since those aspects of your life are still very normal, you feel like, I don't feel like we're falling into a dictatorship, an authoritarian form of government. I don't feel that. But what is that supposed to feel like?
Exactly. We don't know, right? Because we, as the people alive right now, most of us have not experienced anything like that. But I think it's important that we do watch for little signs. You know, when I was in Paraguay in the Peace Corps, one of the things I worked on was preserving the media, preserving communication. When you are in a dictatorship, one of the first things they want to do is cut off communication. So as we tried to bring a democracy to the country, that's one of the things we tried to strengthen the community radio stations. As reporters, we wanted to make sure they were able to talk to city council people. Those are things, this conversation we're having right here, those are things we have all taken for granted, because most of us don't understand what it's like to live under a dictatorship or a fascist government. But what I'm encouraging people to do is, as we see those changes to the media, which we do, I mean, if you look very carefully, you can see how media is shifting in their ideology. Those are the signs that we need to watch out for.
I mean, even when you think of press conferences that the administration may give, they call on what they consider the more friendly media folks.
Right? They're controlling it. They want to control it. They want to control what we hear. And just like history, they want to control what we remember. When you have people who start to feel like did I remember that, or did that really happen? That's when things are getting a little scary, and I think that is exactly where we're going.
As history is getting erased, as parents, I think we have a responsibility to make sure that our kids know their history. I know I tried my best to make sure my kids knew that my mother came up in the Second Great Migration. She came up from Calhoun County, Georgia, because it was so oppressive down there. There was nothing for them except hard times. And to make sure they knew that, to make sure, my daughter and I both love literature, make sure you're reading. Make sure you're reading those great artists, the Maya Angelou's, the Toni Morrisons. Make sure you know, make sure that we as parents are passing on our history, that it's not just a school thing, not just something you learn in this particular place, but something that you're learning from the people who love you, your parents.
That is so true, and I actually have gone on my own personal history journey. I got my results about 3 or 4 years ago on Ancestry.com, had been just totally diving into family trees and just really starting to have a newfound respect for the people that came before me, and it's very personal, like you say. It's when your parents talk to you about it, when you can see it, it's a little different from what's in a book. I'll also add, I actually wrote a children's book called Ella Goes to City Hall, and it's about a little black girl who finds a problem in her community, and she decides to get her friends and her family and her teachers together to solve it, and she takes it to City Hall. We have to think about innovative ways to capture, whether it's advocacy or history. We have to do all those types of things, because I think just in this new environment, like I said earlier, when we say history, people tend to kind of glaze over. But we have to find exciting ways, especially with youth, to make sure they understand where they came from.
How can the internet play a role in that?
That's huge. You know, part of the project that I'm working on, when you mentioned African American women in World War II, there is a documentary by Gregory Cook, who produced and directed a documentary called Invisible Warriors, Black Women of World War II. And he also leads the Basil and Becky Educational Foundation, which is his own family foundation, to change the way we depict history. And a part of that is the internet, documentaries, social media. And so you can see, if you follow certain influencers on social media, you'll see they'll put together short TikTok videos or just in like 30-second clips about history. That makes it fun, that makes it digestible, that makes it exciting. Documentaries are huge, you know. An hour-long opportunity, get those in classrooms. That's something that we're trying to do, is through school systems and libraries across the nation, get this particular documentary and other documentaries so we can use multimedia to share the past.
Let's talk about the fact that we've got a governor's race. We mentioned it a little bit earlier about how we've got a governor's race going on in Virginia. You currently live in Virginia. How important is it to get out the vote?
It's extremely important. And you know, one reason why Virginia and New Jersey have particular influence is because it's an off year, and next year we'll go into our midterm elections, when of course everybody has congressional elections. I just want to add, in Virginia, it's not only the governor's race, it's lieutenant governor, it's attorney general, it's local, and it's also all of the House of Delegates. And so Virginia and New Jersey have an opportunity to shape the messages that are used in the following year and years, because no one else is really getting a sense of what's happening on the ground outside of polls. So Virginia voters and New Jersey voters have that opportunity. In 2021, Virginia's race became front and center, and that's really how a lot of the parental rights that we're talking about now, that started in Virginia in 2021, because that became the focus of the Virginia gubernatorial race. Therefore, that influenced the messages and the issues in 2022 midterms, and then still today. So for all those Virginia voters out there, it is extremely important that we're engaged, that we get out the vote. We were saying earlier too, you know, even though most of the work that I do is nonpartisan, it does put a little twist on it when you have that the African American female is the Republican candidate, and you have the white female who is the Democratic candidate. So that does actually change, and that also, just like Virginia is setting the course in terms of messaging in general for the rest of the nation, there are other black conservatives there are more across the nation who are becoming more prominent, Florida, North Carolina, and so that also impacts how we as and of the Black community and then the overall community talk to each other and the candidates and about the candidates, because that's a shift from how America has usually operated.
Why do you think there's been such a rise in Black conservatism over the last few years? Given the circumstances, given what we're seeing, these efforts to minimize our history, the efforts to make it seem like slavery was a walk in the park. You got 3 meals a day and a bed to sleep in. So what are you guys complaining about?
You know, I personally think there's probably a few reasons. One is there are a lot of people who are just not happy with the status quo. They're not happy with the way things have operated. So they feel like if one particular party isn't doing what they said they're going to do or what the rest of the Black people say they're going to do, that they feel like they should have another option. You know, whether I agree with that or not, that's not when I when I talk under a nonpartisan hat, that's not really the case. But you know, I also think it's been a slow rise. What I hear, I also think that the current president has a lot to do with it. Whether we like it or not, he is a very charismatic figure, and he has drawn in a lot of people, Black and white, and from across the spectrum, who you would not think would support someone like him. So I think that this is kind of an anomaly in terms of how we're set up right now with the current president. But like I said, I think that there's been a slow rise in terms of Black conservatism. What I'm hearing too is that they're really pushing back on the idea of handouts. I mean, this is something that this has always been a central part of the Black conservative and the conservative platform, but I feel like it's coming more to the forefront now. We don't want handouts. We want to be respected just like everyone else. We don't want people to give us any kind of special treatment. Like, that is something that has been consistent, and it's just getting more attention now.
Let's go back to what we were talking about with the Smithsonian. Mm-hmm. For people who aren't paying close attention, exactly what's happening? What is being removed? What is being added?
So President Trump issued an executive order back in March of this year, which basically said that he was anti, either un-American activities, including, museums. So that included the National Museum of African History and Culture. There are some things he was opposed to about some women's museums as well. And so there actually, for a while, there were conflicting reports about what actually was happening. There were reports that there were exhibits being removed who supposedly did not fit what the president wanted. And so what the groups that I'm doing, the groups that I'm involved with, what we're focusing on is whether it's about to happen or it did just happen. We want to focus on the idea of just preserving what's there, and that there being a process to remove anything from a museum that's already been, this is how and another thing I'll say is that a lot of our organizations, we put a lot of money, and when we created this museum several years ago, a lot of us fundraised and did a lot to support it. And so actually a lot of our organizational exhibits are there. So, the idea that a president can just remove exhibits is something that we're not going to stand for.
Who is making the decision? I'm sure he's not standing in the museum saying this should go, that should go. Who's making the decision as to what's appropriate and what's not?
That's a great question, and I can't even tell you that I'm totally sure of that. I'm sure it's some of his advisors. It probably something to do with the Park Service, because I know they're involved with, the Smithsonian. So I think that there are probably a lot of different players involved with deciding what would actually be removed.
Do you think people are opposing this enough? Do you think
No,
there's a strong enough?
No, because I don't think enough people know that it's happening. And in some ways, I think that's on us. In a democracy, it works. You do have leaders, you have legislators, judicial, executive, but you have a citizenry that should be using all of the vehicles and platforms that we can to try to raise awareness, especially when you have an election coming up. And that's where it's going to really make a difference if you educate the voters on what is happening, and then they vote for the leaders that won't allow it to happen again.
Now, as someone who's worked in places where they have a dictatorship, what do you feel about the idea of journalists being silenced?
It's a problem. it is one of the first signs that there is going to be an issue in terms of switching from your democratic government to another government, another form of government. When I was in Paraguay, one of the things that I helped with was to help the student governments was one thing, but also the local radio station. And so we got support for this community radio station and made sure they were almost like a community organization. So we made sure they had the training, the ability to, how do you talk to elected officials? Something that remains with me till today is, I remember his name was Rafael, one of the main, the owners of the community radio station, walked outside of a city council meeting and he had an interview with the mayor, or in Spanish, it was called the intendente. And he had a conversation with him about what happened in the meeting. And at certain times they were allowed to actually go in the meeting. Although this seems very normal to us in the United States, that was novel for them. Because in a dictatorship, of course, they're trying to cut off all of that communication. And in a dictatorship, that's one of the first things that they do is cut off communication. So any type of restrictions of journalists, to me, are a really bad sign that we're heading in the wrong direction.
I was watching a report the other day, and they were saying that another sign of a dictatorship is to take a big tragedy and turn it around. It is the opposition's fault.
Wow.
That this tragedy, even if the opposition had nothing to do with what happened, to make it their fault. And so the question is, what can we do with the messaging to get the right messaging out there? It seemed like years ago there were message people who knew how to do that. Why are we in this time where everybody seems like, I don't know what to do?
I think almost like you were saying before, it's like people, they're complacent, like they don't think that it's really happening. They don't want to believe that it's really happening. So I think that's the first step. Because I even talked to some of my own family members, and I'm like, don't you see these signs? And they're like, well, that could never happen. That's illegal. It's
yeah,
like,
okay.
It's like we need to at least, and even if you think people like me are paranoid, I just ask you to just take a step back and just observe. Like even look at the news over time, right? So I think that's the first step. And then, I actually saw there's a polling company called Hit Strategies, and they do a lot of polling in the Black community. They recently did some polling in both New Jersey and Virginia to prepare for the elections on November 4th. And one of the things they found is that African Americans in particular are looking for someone to stand up for them. They see everything that's going on. And that's another reason why I think there's a rise of Black conservatism, because people are seeing someone like Trump and other leaders. It looks like he's being a leader. He is standing up. And so one of the things that they stress to us is that in our outreach, we need to show that our leaders, our civic leaders, are standing up for people. They are willing to stand up, but some of them are also scared. And so we have to figure out what that looks like. When I'm thinking about tactically on the ground and getting the vote out, if people are scared, they're not going to show up to vote. So what does that mean? We have to use other things like mail-in voting, which thankfully we have worked hard to get mail-in voting. There's early absentee voting. You can vote in person early. So we have to be prepared in Virginia, because early voting actually starts on September 19th, this Friday. So we have to realize that actual election day turnout might be lower because people are simply scared to go to the polls.
And that's going to be an issue, especially for the Latino community.
Exactly.
You're scared to go to the polls because you're afraid when you come out, you might get arrested.
Exactly. So
has that been an issue where you are in Virginia with the
in certain areas? Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. I think it is throughout the nation. Yeah, unfortunately.
It seems like in some areas the whole, I guess the administration is trying to get us used to the idea of having the National Guard and soldiers on our streets to where it looks normal. And that's the whole marketing genius.
There you go.
Is once it looks normal, then you can pretty much do what you want to do. But it is not part of who we are. To have troops in the street, and they're not trained for that.
No.
I have 2 sons in the military. My husband, former military, retired, and it's like that's not what they're trained to do.
But if you don't know your history, if you don't know how we have fought back, and other countries have fought back against this type of behavior in the past, you're not going to really recognize that.
So you do have mail-in voting, because of course there's a
Yes.
push now to get rid of mail-in voting.
Absolutely.
Is that difficult in Virginia?
And actually the president requested, I think, our voter rolls. And he's done that in a couple states, and I wonder if it's because of the Virginia elections coming up, so I don't know what that means. But yes, we do have mail-in voting. We've had it for several years. Right now, as far as we know, as of today, it's going to work fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
of course, that's another thing that we're going to have to face once the count comes in. How is that going to be?
Is it accurate?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another technique, putting doubt into everything.
And he may fight back against those results, just like he did in his own election in Virginia, if it doesn't turn out the way he wants it to. Yeah.
And I guess the answer is where do we go from here? Like you said, we are living history right now. And I remember growing up, I think the most powerful year, you might not have even been born then, but 1968, I was a little girl when Dr. King died. It seemed like everything, so many things happened in that year. You didn't know, how were we going to move forward as a country? Dr. King dies, Robert Kennedy. I mean, so much happened, the Vietnam War going on. And I remember cities burning. And we just thought, how do we move forward?
I personally think we are at a turning point. So when I think about history, I love to look back at moments and say, that was a turning point, that was a turning point. And so throughout my life, I've thought about, is this a turning point? How will the future judge what we are doing right now, what decisions we're making right now? And this is definitely a turning point. Because, if we can stop some things now, I think, of course, the president's been in office since January 20th. He has a lot of momentum, but I feel like if there are some things we can do right now, we can put ourselves back on the right course. Virginia elections, I think are a big part of that, because we are a state that has been considered quote unquote purple, and we have that opportunity. We could go either way. We have all of the three statewide offices are held by Republicans, but both our legislature is run by Democrats. So it could go either way, and this is the time for us to make sure that we are on the right course in terms of how we vote, because like I was saying earlier, that's going to impact what happens in the midterms, which everyone else is looking at as like, okay, that's the big turning point. But I think it's really right now.
How's the ground game in Virginia?
So because of the way Virginia is structured, a lot of my get out the vote efforts are focused in the Richmond area, definitely Northern Virginia, but the Richmond area and the Hampton Roads area. So what we're really trying to do is make sure more than ever that we are connecting the everyday issues with the candidates. Something that a lot of people tend to forget in elections is that, like was said many years ago, it's the economy, stupid. We try to we let social issues and all these other issues get in the way. And while they are very important, and Virginia actually has a potential to pass 3 constitutional amendments in the coming years around voting, around marriage equality, and around abortion rights, the idea of the economy is so key. As we know, Virginia is largely affected by these federal government cuts.
That was my next question.
In Northern Virginia and the Hampton Roads area. So it is so important that we do focus on the economy. But we do have to remember that it doesn't impact everybody. So what needs to change about a lot of our ground games and a lot of the outreach that we do is realizing that one group of people is not monolithic. So yes, Virginia was largely impacted by these cuts, but not everyone was. So we need to start thinking about being sophisticated enough to target different voters and what they might be interested in. We have enough technology to really do that now. We also need to remember we need to be having real conversations with people, and also, like I said earlier, addressing the fact that some people are scared. So we need to think about how we do that outreach with people. The conversations might be a little bit different. We're also trying to focus a lot on relational organizing. That is really, if you know one person, tell 10 people. And that one person tells 10 people. Really getting messaging across that way and having conversations that way. That is extremely key.
And so how do you think your ground game is different now than it was several years ago, and I know that's pretty obvious.
Yeah, I mean, but one thing that's huge is that you have people that simply do not want to. I think you're going to have more people this time that do not want to participate in elections. Some are still upset about what happened in 2024. And then also, like I said, you've got people who are just scared. And then you have people that are like, no, none of these candidates are really doing anything for me. So why should I participate? So that civic education piece, which is, you know, our organization VLI, that's something we are really focusing on, not only with children, but with just adults, to talk about there are a lot of reasons why people don't vote. This is why you should vote. Your vote does matter. You know, this is clearly what the candidates stand for. So I think civic education has to play even more of a role. And when I talk about civic education, it's not only the 3 branches of government. It is about how our communities and elections are realistically working. You know, like I just said.
A lot of people really don't know.
They don't know. Right.
And it sounds like your book addressed that.
It does. And the idea was that I wanted people to feel empowered, starting with kids, is that you can have an idea and you can make something happen. A lot of the things, like I mentioned earlier, it's not just the governor's race, but it's down to the local. Some areas in Virginia have local elections. We don't give our local elected officials enough credit. They are the ones on the ground that are making things happen, usually not partisan, just doing the best that they can for the community. If you start to think about, okay, that local elected official who I saw at the supermarket said hi to me and we had a great conversation about what's going on with my street, or, you know, so those are the types of things we have, and that's an advantage that we have in Virginia, because when you have the local elections too, you can, even if people feel disaffected by what's going on at the federal level or even at the statewide level, they understand what's happening in their community, and that's a great way to get them out to vote.
In wrapping up our discussion, what do you think the future will hold? You said you have predicted key moments.
Yes.
What do you predict?
I am hopeful. So I remember back in 2016, a lot of people were upset about the election results. And I thought, you know, what I think is this going to be a huge backlash to that outcome of that election. And I think that you're going to have more people of color, more women, just more people across the spectrum decide to run for office. And that is exactly what happened. And if you, one of the things you can be sad about everything that's going on right now in our country, but the engagement level of different people, different types of people, has increased so much in the last 10 years.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. We've been talking to Krysta Jones, founder of Vote, Lead, and Impact.
Yes.
And of course, you're my sorority sister,
yes,
Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated.
Yes, Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated.
You've been watching the Sisters for Fitness Wellness Show. I'm Stephanie Gaines-Bryant. Enjoy the rest of your day.